Well, hi, my name is Matt Monaco, and I'm here to maybe take a look at a few different types of projects. This one will start with a square end grain blank, and what we're looking to do is create an exercise that allows us to use the skew chisel, both a 1-inch and the 1/2-inch skew. And in this segment, we're going to look at being able to actually use it for the sake of both roughing down an object such as this, and we'll be able to get that into round. From that point, we're going to go into creating an exercise, putting 3 loose rings and on the spindle itself, and also create coves with the skew. This will be something that will allow you to be able to take the skew chisel and think of it as more than just a back alley weapon or something that can just open a can of wax, and get you to understand that it's actually a wonderful tool to use. It's fun to be able to apply some cuts with, and at the end of it, I hope we'll be able to add some inspiration to the way that you go through your wood turning process. Firstly, put my glasses on. Go between centers. And we'll get to roughing this piece down. It's not so important that you're at the dead center, but close enough. Don't want to be so close that I'm spinning to actually hit my tool rest like that. I'll back it up enough. And looks like we're probably in business here. Also, the other thing is, being that this project will get down onto a smaller diameter, much smaller diameter, with 3 rings actually fitting onto a stem here, I want to make sure that the amount of compression that I'm applying with my dead center isn't so great. It's just enough so that if I lock my spindle, I can see that I don't have any play on my 4 prongs in this case. I have a little bit more, so that means I'll go ahead and add a little bit more compression, about a 1/4 turn at a time if I can do that. So with those 2 1/4 turns, looks like I'm now not beyond the point where I'm adding more play within the prongs. So that looks good. I should now be able to get going. Other thing to remember is that when I'm using a skew chisel, I don't want to start at the center of the blank. It's best to actually start at the corner so I can actually have a sweeping pass that allows me to cut through the piece, not hitting a wall of end grain fiber. That's actually going to create a lot of tear out. What I want to do is start at the corner, either cutting towards the tailstock or headstock, and move into space. So that's what we'll do first, and we'll just get into it. I'm running the lathe at about 2,000 RPM. This is a good place to be, and also utilizing the tool handle and body to make my cuts, more so than I'm relying on bevel support, being that I don't really have it at the moment. I'm looking for this sound, not this. That's not so good. That's much better. That's with the short point. And what I'm going to do now is actually take the long point of the skew, go the opposite direction, starting again from the corner, being that, again, starting from the middle and going into either the left or right with a square is not such a good thing. That creates a lot of tear out. Long point in at the corner. What I'm doing now is allowing the bevel to ride on the surface. And once you see that sound goes silent, that means that I'm actually on a round spindle. Have to make sure that I maintain a gap that is a little closer. Typically about 1/4 inch to 3/8 is sufficient. So I'm almost at the point where I've trued the piece up. Still a little bit more at the center, as can be heard. So I want to get rid of that helicopter sound. And you'll see that I have some nice bevel support here. And something that allows me to do this efficiently is realizing that every point at which I enter a cut now, being that I don't have a square to work with, but rather a round cylinder, means that my point of entry is not the cutting edge like this, but rather right here. What I'll do now is go ahead and actually make a planing cut across the surface to true the piece up. Bevel first, cutting to the right using the short point. All the way to the end. With this particular type of project, I want to make sure that I'm using the visual cue of the actual cylinder to be as trued up as I can. It is, but that both sides, both diameters are about the same. So I'll go back the other way as well. Again, bevel, rubbing, cutting in with the long point. Both corners should be about trued up and be about the same diameter if I can get it. This is more of a visual exercise now. And here we go. So it looks like those are about the same. I'll actually true up both ends of the grain. First taking a peeling cut on both sides. Always the long point facing the end grain if I can get it. The trouble with using the short point isn't that you can't create a planing cut. You can. It's just that this is a point of symmetry of the tool where it's more of convex. And although that might not dig as much into the end grain fiber, I actually need to pick up the fiber to be able to just take the tool straight up. That's to say the handle, and allow for myself to have a space where the long point can now pick up a cut right at the corner, go straight in. I have to roll the unsupported edge, in this case, into the end grain fiber. That's an okay thing, so long as I don't roll it into oblivion, is what I would call that, and that creates a catch. Just enough to where I can just pick up the fiber. Make a nice downhill cut. There we go. This is also eliminating a little bit of the vibration as well in the overall blank. And now I have, again, a nice resting place for the long point. Straight down, same idea on the other side. Now I'm rolling the unsupported edge into this area, and that's the end grain fiber. But again, not rolling it so much into oblivion that I have the catch. Long point in. Pretty clean. What I'll do now is make a bead on both sides, starting with a V-groove. A V-groove is essentially 3 cuts. One straight in, one to add depth, and one to add a little bit more. About 3 cuts. And this is something where, although I don't want to get out, although I can do with, say, measuring tools, I'd rather do it all by eye so I can practice the ability to create a nice nice taper, nice cove and a taper on both sides. And it also gets me to roll some beads. So here are 2 fairly evenly wide segments. This is now the short point coming in. Typically I'll use the short point to roll a bead if I can help it. Reason 4 is that the point of symmetry that's rounded more so over here allows me to create that shape. It's a little easier. Whereas if I use the long point, the tendency is that if I split the fiber at the center, that's accounting for creating more of an apex at the center. Not what I want. A bead or half bead is just one cut at the center, a little bit of a planing cut, and now, or a peeling cut, and then turning directly into planing cut. Other side of the bead, half bead. Now I can take the long point and round that. If I still have a high spot at the center, just come back and just touch the surface. So there's one. Let's roll another. Short point into the corner. Short point other side. See if I can rub the bevel first, and there it is. That long point allows me to get down a little further on the half bead sections, and I'm looking at 2 equidistant beads on just a cylinder. What I'll do now is maybe just create a V-groove at the center, long point only. It's not that you can't use the short point to create a V-groove. The trouble is that it's sort of an inverted cut insofar as the long point being thrown in like this, and that can create a catch. Best is it to have the long point go in so that the round section is actually, as I'm raising the handle, faced away from the cut. So that's a good thing to know. When I get to the center now, and here we are, this is now a good place to be able to make some cuts inward. These are all planing cuts. Short point. This is a peeling cut, or peeling cut, going straight in. Now planing cut. Short point. When I get close to my first bead, what I'm doing is I'm hoping to be able to roll something nice. This is actually the long point now. I find that on a thinner bead, you can actually use the long point. Not so much on a wider bead. Thinner bead would be, for me, is more about maybe 1/8 of an inch. So there's my first bead. Essentially a raised bead. These are all planing cuts. All going downhill. You can see that the fiber buildup here isn't something that if I were to go into like this, that's tearing out. Reason I get to applying a peeling cut near the V-groove section of this bead is for the sake of not wanting the material that's attached to it to actually tear the bead out. So right now, I'll just go ahead and peel, come back for a nice plane at this point. You can see that both sides are accounting for a nice cove sweep. Long point in. So this is representative of a nice piece that is giving me some element of practice. Not so much about design in this case, it's just about learning to use the skew most effectively. And if you've never made a loose ring in your life before, well, it's good to start now. Long point, rolling, and there we go. I'm looking to also ensure something is that the height of the bead is about twice as high as the bead is wide, for the sake of realizing that when I get the long point underneath, that amount of pressure which is innate in this type of cut, this type of piece, that can just break right off. So it's good that I have some support on the height of the bead. And other side, as you'll see, if I take this planing cut in all the way up to this bead on the side of it, that can actually tear out. Again, that's why I'm looking for a peeling cut, and that helps to ensure that I have a nice smooth bead. If I take the planing cut all the way through, that can break off pretty badly, and that'll actually tear into the bead. So what I've done now is I've made sure that my plane or my cove sweep is actually going underneath the bead on one side a little bit more than the other. It doesn't really matter which side you break the bead off from, but you just want to be comfortable with the skew enough to know which side is in your best interest to do that with. That's looking pretty decent. And then the other side, it's okay. I'm at the point where this bead's going to break off pretty soon to be a captive ring. Long point's allowing me to be able to make a series of shearing cuts downhill. And let's see about the center of the bead, just to make sure that it's nice and even if I can help it. It's okay to be a perfectionist. Just don't expect perfection. That's a helpful cause for being able to have confidence in what you do. To reach a point where you're actually happy with what you do, it's a fair thing to do for yourself. So it looks like I can probably break this free, probably not from this side, being that the taper on this side is a little lower. I'll break it free from this side. And we'll take the long point in. There we go. So it looks like we have one loose ring. The key to this exercise is realizing that when you get to this section, this should be something that makes you happy enough, realizing that you've used the skew effectively, and it's kind of a fun thing to do to realize you can do this. This just exemplifies a little bit of tool control, a little bit of time spent in understanding. What I can do is take this project a step further and realize that I've created a little burnish mark right there. And why don't I go ahead and actually apply another V-groove right at the very center. And you'll notice something is that the width is about the same and matches the width of the first that I've cut. That's what I'm looking to do. The idea again with this project is to put maybe 3 loose rings on a taper here. Downhill, short point, and now the long point coming in. Long point's accounting again for going underneath the bead, and when I make a peeling cut, this is probably my preferred side to lead with, is long point. Now I can take this bead, it'll break right off here in a second. The loose ring should go maybe about right now or close to that point. Essentially at every blemish that you create from the loose ring, that should account for another ring to be created. So here's about where the second one will be. And again, I'm minding that the overall width is about the same. Best is it to be able to actually remove a bead that's thinner rather than thicker. If it's thinner, it just makes it so that the long point doesn't have to go under so far, and that you're not applying so much pressure, creating much of a burn on the underside of the bead. It's good practice, something that's pretty decent to remember. We all need practice. Doesn't matter how much experience we have, practice is a good thing. So I can just have that bead kind of rest on the taper. Long point now creating my bead. Again, on a thinner section of bead, doesn't matter so much. So there's 1 and hopefully 2 right here. It's okay to hope. Again, it's nice to be able to know that since this has all been trued up and this is all just solid round, leading with the bevel first is helpful. Now again, I'll go ahead and take the long point in. This looks to be now twice as tall as the width of the bead. So now I'll go ahead and take the long point in. That looks to be good. The shaving I'm looking for when I go underneath is something that's very small. Just a very thin shaving. Not so much something like this. This is a little bit more aggressive. but I'm looking for, again, smaller shaving. This is just an exercise. Downhill now with the long point. You can go short or long point. I do find, however, that the long point leading in from where my sweep begins, just to the left or right of the bead, depending on which side you're on, is helpful with the long point because it wants to take a heavier, more conical shape downhill, and that's actually helping to define the space on this piece a little bit more. I like using the long point. You can use both. The point is that try both, long point and short point, get used to it, spend a little bit of time. So there's a long point coming down. Always clean that bevel off. Long point coming in. There's our long point now, going down inward. And here we go. Looks like we have about, on both sides, longer height than we have width. That's good. Greater height than width. Now going underneath here, it's really just a matter of making sure that the long point's going in far enough to surpass the mid portion of where the bead is, and we're in business here. Looking good. I think I'll probably be breaking the taper off, breaking this taper off on the other side, and here we go. Taper coming forward. Take that bead down. Make sure that I get close enough to the bead to put the long point in. There we go, and I bet you I can probably break that one free too. Getting close to it. Maybe a little bit more. Long point in. Again, just rolling downhill. Kind of a fun exercise to do. It's always fun to see a ring just be able to kind of hang out on both sides, one or the other. You'll find that the taper is easier if you'll find that the matching of having 3 loose rings of different size will be equidistant if you keep the taper close to where the beads are on both sides, and you don't take this particular diameter down just to the left or right of the bead. I find that it's a good visual exercise. Also, I'm realizing something else is that as I get to the second bead, my diameter is getting a little bit smaller at the point where I need to be able to break the bead free. Why don't I go ahead and lower this just a little bit? Just a bit. There we go. And just to ensure I can break the bead off from the other side clean, again, bevel rubbing in. That should break free now from the other side. Remember, when I get close, I want to be able to turn this into, go from planing to peeling. And now this should come right off. There we go. So now we have 2. Nice to see that. If you even get 1 and you do it successfully, be proud of that. That's a good thing to do. Again, we're going back to this notion of the 3rd loose ring. We're just applying our mark right where that blemish is in this area, and keeping the width about the same as if we can. Don't worry about screwing something like this up. It's just wood. There's my short point. Again, I like showing a combination of short and long point. For me to tell you that I should only lead with the long point's a little misleading because both sides of the tool do the same thing. I just have a preference of maybe getting down to using the long point more so, given that, again, the conical shape that I can cut with the long point. Here's my long point. That can dig in a little bit more and accentuate the curve a little bit more so. So it's a matter of practice and time spent, which is always a good thing on the lathe because lathe turning is fun. It's a fun thing to do. This is the short point. Really accentuating the taper on one side. It's fairly clean too. That's the beauty of a skew, is it cuts a really nice taper and it just cuts clean in general if I'm planing. So here we go, getting underneath. Now I'm planing, or excuse me, peeling, now I'm planing. And here we go. There's a peel, and just getting to the point where I can now actually have the smaller ring that's currently loose, spin right off, get to the other side. I bet you I can do it now. That's a good thing. And the other one, that's looking pretty good. So here we go. Same width if I can help it. Again, it's a visual exercise, so I don't want to use measuring tools. It's just for getting to the point of developing some efficiency, guys. That's all it's really for. Efficiency is a good thing if you can have it. It just makes your time spent on the lathe a little bit more fun if you realize that the notion of practice is something that can help you. It certainly does help me out. I've never reached a point yet where I've said to myself, I don't need to practice. I always find that I can still improve. There we go. And there's the other loose ring. Well, not quite yet. Might be getting ahead of myself, but I'm going to assume that I'll break it free. And really what happens at this stage is that once I break that, if and when I do break the third one free, that allows me to be able to take a look at where my taper is resting to ensure that the 3 rings can kind of rest on each side of the spindle and really account for an area to where you can see, or an area somewhere at each section of my bases to have a nice equidistant section of beads. That accounts for then a very well placed taper and one that's cut fairly even on both sides. So here we go, rounding that, and also maybe I'll peel just a little bit. There we go. If I can get this out of the way, that's a good thing. Maybe the larger one too. Where am I there? That looks pretty decent. Just tell them to stay, and then hopefully they will. So the idea is to have width between the rings that are even. That's not something I'm so concerned about yet. You can't really do that until you actually have 3 rings broken off. And it looks like on this side, getting close, and long point down. You see that I'm using the larger skew as well. I find that using the larger skew is helpful for the sake of the balance of the tool. It may actually be a little bit easier to get underneath the surface using a smaller 1/2 inch. I like sticking with this tool because I know that the larger, wider skew if used is representing a little bit more balance in my ability to make this happen if I can get it done. And looks like we're doing okay. There's a short point going downhill again. There we go, underneath. That's probably with the long point underneath that section of bead enough on the side that I can take this through and hopefully account for breaking that off. So there we go. You just tell it to stay. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. There's my long point going downhill, making a nice taper. Kind of an hourglass style form. Long point in. This isn't something that I really like to sand either, just so that I can account for seeing that something's cut straight off the tool clean enough to be happy with what I have. Pretty good, pretty decent taper. Remember guys, it's practice. Practice is okay. Practice doesn't make perfection, it makes progress. And if your turning's a little bit better, or your ability to turn maybe one loose ring led to trying the second and the second one fails or the third fails, it's okay. Just keep trying, stay with it. There's another day tomorrow. And also, this is also firewood. If you have a fire pit, that stuff burns. It's okay. Then you can just throw another one on the lathe. There we go, there's a third loose ring. So now that we have our rings available to us, so to speak, what I'm looking to do is maybe stop the lathe for a second and see where the taper and the rings are resting. And it looks like right now we can see I don't have enough material taken out of the center of my cove sweep. So it looks like if I just keep going here, I'm looking at my long and my tallest and second tallest bead here, second largest bead rather. Looks pretty equidistant there. And where are we on the other side? Fairly close. Maybe we'll keep going now. I'll go ahead and accentuate the bead grooves that I have on both sides and maybe ensure that I have the cleanest roll that I can have on each bead, being that I have enough material and mass to support this cut. So there's an accentuation of that bead groove. Same thing on the other side. Go ahead and now roll. Long point, as long as I lead with the bevel first, can be okay. Not the most efficient thing if I'm rolling my beads with the long point only. That can really mean that I have an apex at the center that I don't want. Not what I want really. So just be careful when you roll and make sure that when you do, you start with the bevel support. Accentuate that V groove a little bit more. Roll again with the short point, just because it's good to practice it. And hopefully I can take this cut all the way down the side, just to clean it up. That's pretty decent, and I'll go ahead and accentuate a little bit more. Quick roll, long point, bevel first. Bring that down, and maybe all the way down, just to practice chewing up the surface on my end grain fiber. That's looking pretty good. Happy with that. Now long point that starts from the center into the corner, or rather into the V groove. So there we go. We'll go ahead and now focus on creating a nice taper, which it's already there. So now we're about to be able to continue going downhill. And it's a matter of having these 3 rings line up on both sides at an equidistant enough placement on each section of where the cove starts. If we can see that, we know that our usage with the skew is actually going quite well. We're doing a good job. I suppose this could also probably be a baby rattle too. If you have a loud friend, you can just have them hold it and shake it, and they won't know that they're holding it for a reason. Just don't tell them. Downhill, pretty nice taper. The trouble can be when you actually jam if you jam the tool into the taper, to the loose ring, and you don't have as much material taken off of the taper. That's where we're going to be very slow when we get towards the center. We have room to take off quite a bit more material now. Let's go ahead and do that. This is long point downhill. There we go. Pretty clean. Looking like we're sitting nice there. And we'll keep going. This is all long point. I do find that if I'm using a skew, cutting to the right or towards the tailstock side, cutting this direction with the long point can be a bit of an issue, because for me to actually get the shear cut, I actually have to start just below or above the center line right here of the skew's cutting edge. If I use a long point, trouble is that to be at that place, my body's so far over that it's not really a good position, and it's more like throwing a harpoon or a spear into the material, digging into the end grain fiber. So if I cut to the right as a right-handed person, it typically helps to use the short point, typically. Try it out, see what you think. And we should now be loose enough with that smaller loose ring to really be able to account for moving the rings around a little bit more. Let's see where this loose ring ends up, okay? A little bit more. I would say that the main focal point is to just feel confident and good enough that you have 3 rings on there, and that's not a bad thing. Not a bad day, not a bad thing. But it's really just, at this point, it's just a matter of creating a taper that is efficiently placed enough and centered enough that you can account for bringing those rings up to sit equidistant from each other. Let's just see where we're at. We have a little bit more to go here, but it's good to just know what we're practicing. So this distance from the end of the beat to here, I don't exactly know the measurement. It doesn't really matter. This is just a practice item. So that looks pretty decent. And the other side, that's pretty close too. Let's see where the second largest ring is placed on here. That looks pretty good here. That's about equidistant. The third, it's really getting that third ring and getting the final sweep of the taper to account for that third ring to sit equidistant. So let's check the other side and get this second smallest ring. Looks like we have a little bit ways to go on this section. I maybe a little bit more to take out, perhaps. So here and there. Actually, that looks pretty even. So I think what I'll do is just focus on taking a little bit more out at the center of the taper. Again, I'll lower the tool rest a little bit more, being that I'm on a much smaller diameter, and that should be helpful. So here we go. Pretty happy with that. not really using my fingers as a steady rest in this case. It's mostly just a matter of making sure that I can keep these things out of the way. The next thing to contend with is just not being annoyed by the fact that they're in your way. So the tool control is helpful there too, if you can account for that. And looks like we're doing pretty well here. And if you can come back and lead with the bevel first, that's always a good thing. There we go. So once you get a decent taper on here, that's to say without any tear out, if you can help it, it's good to just stop the lathe for a second and then see where everything's resting, where everything's sitting. And also this will mirror the other type of project, the other project that we do. It's okay to call this a project. This is probably arduous enough of a task to get to 3 loose rings that it's not necessarily just practice. But if you can get one on here, that's good enough for you. And I'm happy with what we see. I'll stop the lathe here in a second, just to see where our 3rd and smallest ring rests on the taper. And that'll be good. Let's go ahead and stop it. So we'll see that we have 1 and 2, and then where's our 3rd? That's pretty close. I'd say that you can be happy with this position right here. That's looking pretty good. Doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be close. Remember, practice should mirror a project or a process, and the idea of perfection is just kind of not real. And if you do anything perfectly, you'd never have to do it again anyway. So that looks pretty good. I'd say that that's pretty decent in terms of being equidistant and tapered. So I'm happy with that. Let's see how the other side looks. And if the other side looks good, then it's just a matter of trying to be a perfectionist and to get any of the blemishes out. That's to say any, not tear out, hopefully no tear out, but ridges, if we can. We'll see that that's actually looking pretty decent too. I think I can account for removing a little bit more material here. Looks to be a little bit thinner on this side than the other. And I think that we're looking good and we have it. But if you've made it this far anyway, you're doing pretty good. You should be proud of that. It's okay to be proud of something that you've done well. Confidence is not arrogance. It's okay to be proud of what you do and to like what you do. That's actually how you decide for yourself that you're instilling appreciation for the craft, and it keeps you at the lathe longer. And practicing is actually fun. And at the end of the day, have a fire. Hopefully just not with this. Maybe the shavings, not the piece that you made. It's good to actually see progress and know that what you've made is something that you can keep around. There we go. And there it is. I'm looking to just maybe true this up a little bit more. Remove, not true up, but rather remove a little bit more material in here. That's a little finger control more than anything else. It's not really a steady rest. Again, I haven't applied too much pressure with the tailstock, at least not enough to where I'm now having this piece bow and flex. It would if I put too much pressure initially. That's why I stopped my pressure just before the point at which I had lost the play in the 4-prong center. If you tighten it too much beyond that point where you don't have any play from the 4-prong, that's actually where you have problems, and this will actually bow and bend and you'll have a lot of chatter in here. So you just want to be mindful of that. Now I'm really just looking to maybe, again, remove a little bit more material from the side. And the other side, I'm looking to just get rid of any ridges. There's no tear out on it, but I don't want ridges. And it's okay to be a perfectionist, but still not expect that what you make is exactly perfect, but close enough to that, to again, where you're just happy with what you're doing and you have appreciation for what you do. That's okay. If you have the ability to reach that point, which I believe everyone does, you can actually go share it with someone. And I'd say that's what's pretty much a very lovely and rewarding thing about wood turning, is that you can actually share it with people. It's a good thing to do. At least what I enjoy doing. And I would say that's probably about it. I'm looking to now just make sure my final pass here with my taper is clean. And I think I've reached that point. Let's see what we have for practice. So for practice, guys, this is okay. There's 1 and 2. And I'd say the 3rd is sitting nicely equidistant. So I'd say this side's done. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with what I see there. Just practice. Or it's a rattle. And what about the other side? I'd say that's probably close enough to be happy. So if you can get something like this done and just get one ring on it, that's fine. If you can do it with a skew, you should be even more proud of that or happy with that. It's a good thing to know that we have the ability to call this a nice practice item. We can maybe take this off the lathe now. And although this isn't something I would sell, it's something that I would show or share with others and practice for the sake of being able to get a little more skill underneath my belt. So it looks like we're doing pretty good here. I'm happy with that. Other side. Looking to be pretty good on the other side too. So we can say that something like this is helping us out to become more efficient with the skew. And we can also realize that, again, to reiterate the point that although a skew might be a fair back alley weapon or something that you can open up a can of paint with or even wax, you can also make things that are quite lovely. And it's fun to be able to do this in order to share the craft of wood turning. So thank you.